The temporal fossa. Temporal fossa, located on the lateral norma of the skull, bounded by the superior temporal line, also by the temporal line of the frontal bone, and inferior temporal line on the parietal bone. Inferior border of it is the supramastoidal crest, yes, and hypothetic line which pass on the plane of zygomatic arch. There is boundaries of temporal fossa. On it, you can find all temporal surfaces of parietal, temporal, sphenoidal, great-wing, and frontal bone. All of them are called temporal fossa surfaces. In this communication of temporal fossa can be traveled and communicated with infratemporal fossa through this opening, yes, behind of the zygomatic arch. The content of the temporal fossa. In the temporal fossa located temporal muscle, which you can see on this superficial temporal artery with their branches, located in this fossa. Topographical unit of the lateral norma is infratemporal fossa, which formed by bones with their infratemporal surfaces, such as infratemporal surface of the maxilla, lateral plate of the pterygoid process of the sphenoidal bone, infratemporal surface of the greater wing, and same part of the thalamus, part of the temporal bone. All of them fused together to form the walls: superior wall, anterior wall, medial wall, and lateral wall. Superior wall of this fossa formed by infratemporal surface of greater wing and squamous part of the temporal bone. Anterior surface formed by the infratemporal surface of maxilla, and medial formed by lateral plate of pterygoid process of sphenoidal bone. Some confusion means lateral plate form the medial wall, and lateral wall of the Pterygopalatine fossa formed by the mandible. Communications of the inferior temporal fossa. First, communicate with the medial cranial fossa through the foramen ovale and foramen spinosum nearby, and foramen lacerum, such as communication between the external base and infratemporal fossa. Also, to the front of it, communicate with orbit through the inferior orbital fissure, and this small portion on this region pointed by a red color, which leads to the Pterygopalatine fossa. The content of this fossa. First, it is projection of parotid gland. Small amount of the parotid gland lay in this fossa. The most of the cranial nerves, such as mandibular, chorda tympani, and facial nerve, also project into the infratemporal fossa. Pterygoid plexus. Pterygoid plexus there is located in infratemporal fossa and pass through the pterygomaxillary fissure into the Pterygopalatine fossa and has communications through all of these openings with orbit, middle cranial fossa, and Pterygopalatine fossa. And location of external carotid artery and the main branch of external carotid artery, such as maxillary artery. There is maxillary artery with their branches which pass through all of openings of the infratemporal fossa, to the midcranial fossa, to the orbit, and to the Pterygopalatine fossa. Also pass through the gap between the infratemporal and temporal fossas. Next fossa of the skull, it is Pterygopalatine fossa, which is located between the three bones. First, it is sphenoidal bone, palatine bone, and maxilla. All of them fuse together and form the gap structure, pyramidal shape, with several communications. Pterygopalatine fossa formed by infratemporal surface of maxilla, maxillary surface of perpendicular plate of palatine bone, and maxillary surface sphenoidal bone of the greater window. To show in better way the communication of the pterygopalatine fissure, we need to leave only 3 bones, it is sphenoidal, maxillary, and palatine bone. On the top of the pterygopalatine fossa you can see the inferior orbital fissure, which is common for pterygopalatine fossa and infratemporal fossa. Second communication of the pterygopalatine fossa is located on the medial wall of this, it is sphenopalatine fissure or sphenopalatine foramen. On the lateral wall mentioned before, communication with infratemporal fossa is fissura pterygomaxillaris, pterygomaxillary fissure. On posterior wall you can see the 2 communication. First of all, pterygoid canal and foramen rotunda, which communicate pterygopalatine fossa with medial canal fossa and external base. 2 main communications which can be found on the inferior apex, greater and lesser palatine foramen, which located on inferior surface of pterygopalatine fossa. Content of the pterygopalatine fossa. Again, mostly same features such as maxillary artery with their branches which pass through the pterygopalatine fossa. Pterygoid plexus, which located same in the infratemporal and pterygopalatine fossa. There is located branch of trigeminal nerve, which distribute from the pterygopalatine fossa from their ganglion through all of the communications. Yes. Also, I forgot to mention that pterygopalatine fossa communicate through the inferior orbital fissure to the orbit and to the infraorbital foramen path to the fossa canina, to the canine fossa.